I went down another rabbit hole. I've noticed recently that one of the things that kind of ties a lot of my rabbit hole searching personally together is in some way or another its connection to quackery. People who assert themselves as medical professionals who are not or should not be if they actually are. I've talked about the whole fiasco with Belle Gibson exerting herself as a naturopathic health leader of ways, talked about the no-fap movement and how there's a lot of pseudoscience and misguided health cure-alls in that. One of my favorite tidbits is that the creator of Young Living, the MLM, was throwing axes at people and resulted in the death of their newborn child because they thought if they kept it underwater, it would learn how to breathe underwater. It would become amphibious. We don't have time today. And one of those quacks that I find so fascinating and I love to bring out as like an icebreaker at parties, trying to get a feel for the room, whether or not they're like cool, is I bring up a man that a lot of people don't know and really should by the name of John R. Brinkley. He is the father of a lot of things that are bad. Quite frankly, he's the father of modern talk radio, was selling pseudoscience to the masses long before, Alex Jones was hawking his supplements full of lead. And he also didn't know his place in a lot of ways in that he decided to venture off into politics. But the thing that would get him most notoriety was a elective procedure that often turned into life-saving procedures in which he would put goat balls in men, as in like he would perform scrotal surgeries on men who come in for various reasons, from erectile dysfunction to lethargy and later to basically any ailment that did or didn't have to do with fertility. And he would recommend that they undergo a surgery in which they cut open the scrotum and put pieces of goat gonads into, it's like a turducken. And this man, unfortunately, was very, very influential and very, very popular and got very, very, very rich. And today we're going to talk about it. John R. Brinkley, the goat ball butcher of Kansas and other states, but mostly Kansas. He is the father in many ways of modern grift culture that he is often left unaccredited for, but not today. Not I. I'm doing my part by ruining your day with this information. But first, hi, it's Kendall here. New around here, welcome. Not new around here, what is up? Home skillet biscuit. I talk about a lot of stuff if you're new here. I love a rabbit hole. I love a little niche deep dive. And so if you find this interesting, feel free to stick around. I've talked about various rabbit holes. Somehow they often do come back to penises. It really goes to show that so much of society's issues is dick and balls. But yes, sit back, relax, and I'm gonna learn you so good. Give you some learning, a real learning to you. But before we get started on this honestly horrific story of modern grift medicine, we're gonna send you over to Admiral Kennie, and all the other mishearings you guys have done since I've started this segment, where I send you over to today's sponsor. Send it away, ahoy.
Hello everyone, this is Admiral Kennie, and today's video is sponsored by Bark, the leading dog first company delivering the cutest, absolutely most adorable dog toys and tastiest treats for your little fur companion. For those of you that know, I have my little Yorkie, Russet. She's a chewer, but more than a chewer, she just likes to see things bounce off the ground and then she'll pounce on it and then be surprised that it doesn't jump back and then pounce on it again. She just likes things thrown in general directions. Also have my partner's dog, Boxer Lab, named Oreo, and he's a medium to large size dog who's a super chewer. He loves a chew. He chews with every emotion. Because of that, he destroys a lot of toys. So finding things that are durable, that are adorable because I can't help myself. I love a pun, and the appropriate size for them and their chew desires or levels is really, really important to me. So much so that I subscribe to Bark's flagship subscription, Bark Box, but they also have the Super Chewer. And monthly, you can get adorable themed boxes that keep tails a wagging, drool a drooling, and keeps you being the cool dog parent. I am the cool dog mom because not only do I have treats and snacks for my dog, I also have treats and snacks for any adorable dog that's walking outside taking a poop. Oh, I didn't see this one in the bag. It's a ramen box, and the tie is chopsticks. Oh. So in each box, you get 2 original toys, 2 bags of treats, and 1 chew delivered to your house every month for your little companion. It's fully customizable to your dog's wants, desires, if they have allergies, things to avoid, their size, toy preferences, all that. And again, most importantly for me, they're adorable. This is the pork belly rub ramen, beef scented reinforced nylon strap. This was actually in their Tokyo themed box. A sushi chew toy, like a softer chew. I also got a barbecue themed one that had like a little hot dog in it. I could cry. But the thing that has me losing my mind, I don't wear nothing but Crocs. The moment I bought my first pair of Crocs, it was over. They have teamed up with Crocs, and if you click on the link down below, you can get some Crocs for your dog. Russet has not tried these on yet. She will have no choice. Look at this. There's 4 of them, obviously. He's gonna be so adorable. And if you would like to check out BarkBox, you'll get a free pair of Crocs for your dog if you click on the link down below. Big thanks again to Bark for sponsoring today's video and bringing me so much joy. Now let's get on to the debauchery.
So like most terrible, lesser known facts that I've learned, I first heard of this horrible person, John R. Brinkley, via one of my favorite podcasts that I'm pitching at least 3 times a year called Behind the Bastards. I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite podcasts, one of the few that I actually keep up with relatively often. It's a podcast devoted to talking about the bastards of history, some that are more well-known, like Kissinger, you know, Shadoff, Schrittler, other fascist leaders, as well as like lesser-known people, hence John R. Brinkley. And they would actually do a 2-part series plus like a companion piece a few years later on Brinkley called The Goat Testicle Implanting Doctor Who Invented Talk Radio. That's a fucking title, ain't it? I'm sure I can't title this better than that. Whatever it is, pales in comparison, I absolutely know. And of course, with a title like that and a 2-parter, of course, I was sat, honey. And so this has been this little tidbit of information that I've known for a very long time, and I love to bring it out like a party trick. The 3rd episode was called How to Insert Goat Balls into Human Balls, which is a reading of Brinkley's sort of literal manual, like the granular details of the surgeries. I'm not going to go into that much detail. My focus is more so on the information around Brinkley himself as opposed to the specifics of the surgeries. Granted, I've already said you split them open and pop them in like a multi-layer jawbreaker. Well, I guess technically it starts in the U and crowds. Is it like a beef Wellington? No, because that's still the outside. I don't have a good analogy for this. The best I have is a turducken. But yes, without further ado, let's learn of the monster John R. Brinkley. So John Romulus Brinkley was born July 8th, 1885, making him a Cancer. We're not doing well, male Cancers. I hear a lot of bad things about you, and I'm not going to help you today. Sorry, this will not be in your favor. His life was quite difficult from the start, being that he was the illegitimate child of a poor mountain man, also named John Brinkley, who was a medic for the Confederates and practiced medicine in North Carolina. His mother, Sarah Burnett, was actually, follow me, the niece of his dad's 4th wife, who was incidentally also named Sarah. Now, because the wife and the niece had the same name, they would call the wife Sally, and the niece was named Sarah. So yeah, he was his wife's niece, and just goes to show that people have always been messy and arguably were messier before. So mom, Sarah, would end up dying when John Jr. was quite young at the age of 5 from pneumonia and tuberculosis. John Sr. would die 5 years after that, so he would be largely raised by his aunt mom, Sally. Aunt Mom Sally would die when John was around his early 20s, and he would be comforted by a woman who he met when he was in school. They went to the same school, and she was a year older than him, who was also named Sally. Keep up. They had John, Sally, Sarah, 3 names. They would end up being married in 1907. Brinkley would do a lot of odd jobs growing up, but he had always wanted to be a doctor, following in his father's footsteps. At this time, in the early 1900s, there was a populist movement to deregulate medicine. There was a sentiment for some reason that anybody should be able to be a doctor. They should just be able to say, I'm a doctor, and be one. Medical doctor.
Anyone, male or female, learned or ignorant, an honest man or a knave, can assume the name of physician and practice upon anyone, to cure or to kill, as either may happen, without accountability. It's a free country.
So doctors should be killing people, is what they're saying.
Doctors shouldn't be held to a high standard of not killing people. They should be able to do whatever they want, because anyone should be a doctor.
And so a lot of places would de-essentialize licenses when providing medical care, aka you can kill somebody. But in fairness, being that at this time, medicine wasn't super great anyway. It was a lot of bloodletting and leeches and mercury treatments. So arguably, if you ended up going with, say, a deregulated naturopath, at worst, you'll be given some herbs or some shit that might make you poop, but you're not dying of mercury poisoning. So some people said you might as well let anybody be a doctor, which goes to show, my God, people have always been so f***ing dumb. You'd think that this type of stupidity is particular, but nope. It was a popular sentiment that people wanted anyone to be able to kill or to cure without accountability, because there is this highfalutin barrier to entry, such as schooling, education, training, all of these things. So Sally would encourage him to forego the more routinized ways of going into medicine and told him to just start calling himself a doctor. And so that's what he did. After that, he was Dr. Brinkley. He started traveling as a Quaker doctor. And at this time, that was sort of synonymous with people who would do medicine shows, which were essentially a public hawking of cure-alls. Think of Pirelli's Miracle Elixir, anything will fix soon sprout skulls, Sweeney Todd's people. How about a bottle, mister? Only costs a penny, guarantee. I haven't watched that this year. I need to watch it. Along this hawking, he would begin to use one of the more in vogue, if you will, technologies in his treatments. Because around this time was the invention of electricity. At the time, electricity became a fad thing to put in basically any item. There were electric ointments, electric foods, electric corsets. And in Brinkley's case, he would sell electric medicine, which by and large was just dyed water that he would give to people via enema and charge them $25 of early 1900s money. For clarification, that's like a hot $800 in today's money. He was charging $800 to put dyed water up their ass. Eventually, he would get enough revenue and enough customer base to create something called the Greenville Electromedic Doctor business, which he would own with another shady businessman by the name of James E. Crawford. About 2 months after opening this storefront, they would flee to skip out on paying rent, utility bills, and the unpaid merchants that had been working with them to flee to Memphis. During this time, his home life was also falling apart. Him and his wife Sally would lose a son 3 days after he was born, and eventually would file for divorce and attempt to get child support for their one daughter. In response, Brinkley would kidnap said daughter, taking her to Canada. Sally was unable to plead to have the courts extradite them back, but eventually, once she dropped her case, he would come back anyway, and they would try to make their marriage work. But as you can imagine, it wasn't a great one. One of the reasons was because Brinkley was a horrible drunk, a wild drinker, which will come up a lot. But as you can imagine, there were also other things about him that weren't too great. He would cheat on her and marry a 21-year-old named Minnie Jones while still married to Sally. But eventually that would end that marriage for good. And Minnie was more of a support of his shenanigans and would also participate in a lot of his medical fraud going forward. Eventually, it would become known that Brinkley and Crawford were practicing medicine without a license. I guess some people still had sense. And also writing bad bad checks, and they would end up being arrested for that. Unfortunately, I think probably the bad checks was the thing that actually bothered them more. Eventually, they would be released and settle out of court, to which they had to repay money for various people they had swindled over the time of them having their business. And instead of deciding to maybe forego the quackery, he decided to get a degree from a diploma mill so that he can legally practice medicine in several states. For those of you that don't know what a diploma mill is, it is basically a school that isn't really a school. You just pay money and get a diploma. It's also illegal. It was then too, but it would take a very long time for people to actually notice. By then, it would be far, far too late. So you may be asking, Kendall, where do the goat balls come in? Well, that would take place around 1916, where Brinkley would be working as a doctor in a meat packing plant. He wouldn't have a whole lot to do. So during his bored days, he would just observe the animals, mainly the goats. And one of the things that he took away from the goats is that they be they be slapping cheeks. He would particularly remark about the very large testicles that the goats had, almost enviously, like, wow, those are incredible. And would also compliment, if you will, the, quote, considerable lubricity of the female. He said the female goats got that gushy, my and he would spend his time watching goats go at it. Around this time, there was a lot of talk, again, in the pseudo-medical community, and probably some of the actual medical community, because again, was using mercury and doing lobotomies and shit, I'm sure. Well, I don't know. Were they doing lobotomies in the early 1900s? This sounds like some shit they would do. Oh, not yet. Not until the 1930s. I'm sure he was cool with that too. But around this time, one of the sort of treatments du jour, or the research du jour, was around sexual energy, particularly as a result of ingesting or implanting animal testes. This could be from monkeys or sheep or various other animals. For some reason, the people that were cool with the monkeys and sheep thought that the goats were just weird. But the idea is essentially that you can harness the testosterone and become healthier, more virile, more masculine. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? If you watched my no-fap video from like a year ago. A lot of this is based in a lot of the sentiments of that movement, which is that a man's health and virility is pretty much entirely dependent on his back pay of whatever. These was saying the same shit that those was saying, and if you'd followed that video, also falls into fascism and anti-Semitism, because how the did we get here? But they were doing this shit back then, okay? But one day, as Brinkley would say, he was approached by a farmer who was complaining of impotence and would bemoan how he didn't have the nuts of a billy goat. Because apparently, because they have such large testicles and have so much sex, they don't have to suffer the embarrassment and the humiliation of erectile dysfunction. Brinkley would say that the man would beg him to give him goat balls. But it would later be found that that's not quite how it went. Brinkley went up to him and offered him a bunch of money to do an experimental procedure on his gonads. So this would be around the beginning of the Brinkley grift, and he would open a clinic in 1919 and start charging men $750 per operation, which is equivalent to like $24,000 per procedure in today's money, in which he would cruelly shove goat balls in human balls and sew them up. These luxury testes would become somewhat a symbol of status, particularly because it was, one, incredibly expensive, but also it would be claimed to have these overall very masculine benefits, including a higher sex drive, better overall health and energy and strength and muscle growth. And not everyone had an adverse response to these procedures, because the human body is truly astounding. Some people would just kind of absorb the matter and push it out, if you will. And some people would even claim to have had some benefit of it, which would most likely be placebo. But regardless, news of this treatment would become very widespread and very, very popular. Eventually, his treatments would also bleed out into women as well, to a much lesser degree. But essentially, if a woman came in and was infertile, he would implant a goat uterus, or goat ovaries in her, this would be seen as a cure to that infertility. Now, he didn't do as many women because the beauty of healing erectile dysfunction with goat balls is that a lot of erectile dysfunction is often mental. So if you go through the procedure of getting goat balls in your balls, you're a lot more likely to believe that this has done something for your virility and may impact the mental block to an erection. So men would often have a lot more quality things to say because regardless of where your mind is at, if you ain't got a uterus, you ain't got a uterus. But because a lot of these men who were suffering from erectile dysfunction would end up being able to stand it up, some of them would be able to fix their issues with impotence and infertility. And Brinkley's practice would become exponentially more popular after one of his patients, who again was suffering from erectile dysfunction, would end up having a child about a year after his procedure. This man, I shit you not, the man would name the son Billy. I don't f with fiction, and that's why I don't f with fiction, because shit like this is out there. It's out there. And he would be known popularly, far and wide, as the first goat gland baby. But soon, Brinkley, much like any grifter, would expand the benefits of his procedure. Not only can it fix issues with fertility, now it could fix anything, essentially. It could fix dementia, mental illnesses, high blood pressure, acne, eczema, aging, emphysema, flatulence. Sure, for women, it can improve fertility, but also improve your skin and make your titties bigger. These surgeries were done inconsistently. There was no real routine or skill or procedure in doing the surgeries. And if that wasn't frightening enough, they were often done drunk. And as you can imagine, though some people would survive this hackneyed job, many would not. But to deflect from any criticism that he may get from that, you know, the people that would die or be seriously harmed from these surgeries, he would say that his surgeries were best suited for the intelligent, meaning that if you were harmed or died from the procedure, it would be perceived that it wasn't because he did a hackneyed job of a non-safe procedure while drunk. It was because you were too stupid to to live from an invasive, very dangerous procedure by a non-doctor. And so this would stop many a proud person, particularly men, from saying that there were any downsides to the procedure. Otherwise, they would be often seen as a dimwit. And though there were a lot of people who would die or be harmed during these procedures, it didn't stop them from getting incredibly popular. Sure, people were dying on the operating table, dying quickly after coming home, people were getting sick, but the information regarding that spread much slower than the wildfire of misinformation that Brinkley was sharing through his advertising prowess. It's not like there was f***ing Yelp at the time where you could be like, hey, I died from this. Seriously, what a time it would have been for there to be Yelp for this man, because God, they really needed it. Because perhaps if that dissemination of information were quicker, people would know more about how absolutely insane John Brinkley was, if you didn't know already from the concept of doing the goat ball soup dumpling thing. I don't know. Because again, not only was he a hack, he was also a drunk. And so there's just so many stories of just truly wild and violent things that he had done in his office, including, but not limited to, chasing his patients out of the office with a butcher knife, threatened to shoot several patients if they didn't pay an extra $100 for a surgery that they had already had. And the information is a little unclear, may have been in the middle of while he threatened to shoot them if they did not pay. One person had to be rescued Wild West style by her brother at gunpoint because he was threatening to shoot people. Tried to build a zoo, I believe in Kansas, where he would end up settling. Bought a bear for his personal residence, I believe, but the bear was too loud, so he shot it. And there's also rumor that may or may not be true, but it is something to look at, that he may have bitten off his assistant's ear. And Tyson thought he did it first. What the f? Despite him being absolutely batshit crazy, he was getting paid. And he was a horrible, greedy man. He would shake down the poor people in the area for, again, an extra $100, which was exorbitant money. What is that, like another $1,000 or something in today's money? But again, these balls and ovaries, but mostly the balls, were particularly prestigious items. They would become widespread, desirable goods, a show of standing and prestige. He would start going around the United States and some places in Asia, if I'm not mistaken, China and Japan at least, giving distinguished men goat balls. He would do it for powerful men in offices, unnamed film stars, judges, and I shit you not, the president of the Bank of Peking. But for those with less money, he would also offer at-home treatments, quote unquote, in which he would send over, again, I'm laughing because it makes me think of the Gerson therapy thing, like the coffee enema shit that I was talking about in the Belle Gibson video too. It's all connected. The quacks have never been unique. But for those with less money, he would make at-home treatments in which he would crush goat balls into enemas and send it to you to do yourself for $100. God. I just love it. I just love history so much. I love the fact that y'all were unmedicated in the world. I'm like, with him gaining notoriety, fortunately, there were people who were actually doctors, and over time, people who would put a lot of value and work into making medicine safer and more science-based. And one of those organizations that would have Brinkley on their radar was the American Medical Association, or the AMA. At the time, there were still a lot of quacks in the AMA, but the focus at the time was to get more evidence-based and science-based treatments for things. And these people would start to clock that Brinkley was a quack and would call for his license to be revoked. That license that he got from a diploma mill, that's illegal, so they're gonna look into that. Brinkley would be at a PR war with the AMA, as you can imagine, releasing a large list of testimonials of people who said they feel never better after getting their new balls. And the AMA would fight back, petty, by putting glowing testimonials of the goat ball transplant next to the same person's death certificate, on which Brinkley often signed, where the person died of the thing that they said the goat balls cured. That's very funny. But again, as usual, discrediting quackery and misinformation is a lot harder to do than spreading bullshit. He was still making an exorbitant amount of money up until 1923, where he decided to make his first private radio transmitter where he would be able to spread, again, his bullshit information and hawk his bullshit treatments to even more people across the United States. Over the radio, he would broadcast, give or take, 6 hours a day, in which he would sprout his ideas of his goat ball operations, share medical advice and information, saying that not only were his treatments curing innumerable illnesses, but they were also creating an overall better grade of human being. It shouldn't surprise me that eugenics became involved, considering this story is such a grab bag of awful things, but it did throw me, but it shouldn't have. Essentially, the people who would have the procedure and then go on to have kids, there would be said that these children were bred from a superior human, that they were giving birth to better, stronger, faster mega babies, quality babies. Eventually, though, it would come out that Brinkley's license was the result of receiving a diploma from a diploma mill, and eventually he would be indicted for practicing medicine without a license, particularly in California. But being that he was so rich and so powerful, particularly locally in Kansas, where he had settled, the Kansas governor refused to extradite him to California to face those charges because he simply made too much money for the area. He was building roads. He wanted to make that zoo. He got the bear, though he shot it. He was putting a lot of money into the area as a way to obfuscate how fucking terrible and terrifying he was. But yes, the Kansas governor refused to extradite him because he was making too much money for the area. Instead, Brinkley would use his station, his private radio station, to express widely how he was being persecuted like Christ by the AMA for them to deign to ask for him to have like accreditation to perform life-altering and perhaps life-ending procedures. In many ways, as much as I hate to admit this, Brinkley was a lot of firsts in the conversation of American media. In many ways, he was the first mic podcast guy who just liked to listen to himself talk and have people hear him talk for a very long time, spreading misinformation and dumb shit. He was also very Alex Jonesying, hawking and fear-mongering his medications and his procedures to the uneducated masses, feeding off of their paranoia and their real life ailments that they were living through or their anxieties around infertility. And on his radio show, he would, knowing that no one wanted to listen to him talk about medical shit for 6 hours straight, that's crazy. He would also intersperse random other things just because it was stuff that he was interested in between his talks of medical information and hawking goat balls. He would also have segments in which there were French lessons and astrologer interviews and storytellers, gospel quartets, and also some of the first forays into the popularization of country music. Unironically, John Brinkley, in many ways, is the father of country music because what was just a local folksy thing in the area that hadn't made popular appeal was now presented to a wider mass through his radio program. And a lot of people who would become figureheads in country music discovered it via his radio show. And he would come and let them play because he liked country music. Before this, most music was largely like classical or stuff like that weren't necessarily of the popular masses. Was he the first disc jockey? Technically, was he the first DJ? Did he make the first playlist? How embarrassing! Oh! Also, another terrible component of an oddly modern aspect of this is that he wasn't just talking to himself. There was a symbiotic relationship between him and his audience because often they would write in asking Dr. Brinkley for advice about their particular ailments. And what he would do, horrifyingly enough, as if that wasn't bad enough, he would often diagnose people and give them medication recommendations for them to pick up his own brand of medication to cure their ailments. He would start putting up pharmacies around Kansas and other states where he sold his own brand of his medication and had them numbered. So if someone called in and said, "Hey, I'm having problems with a sour stomach," he would read their letter, diagnose them over the line, and then go out and get number 14 and 38, which were real medications, but he does not know this person, has not observed this person, has not done any form of testing on this person to say this is how they should go about treating whatever ailment they have. And even worse, if people on the airs would hear this person writing in and say, "Hey, I also have that issue," they too would go out to these Brinkley brand pharmacies to buy this medication and may also get really hurt. The fact that we as a society survived John Brinkley is actually insane. Not to mention, the most American thing about this is that not only did he have his own brand of medication, it was also 6 times more expensive than if they would have bought it at any other place. And because Brinkley was so revered and trusted, surprisingly, because people didn't know the extended lore of his insanity or the AMA's investigations into him, people were betting it all on Brinkley. People who had family members with cancer or other terminal illnesses would go to Brinkley, mortgaging houses, going broke to get these surgeries.
According to the story of Pa and Ma, men who waited too long came home in a wooden box. But if they only listened to Dr. Brinkley and traveled to Del Rio for the operation, they would have returned home healthy and happy.
Where they left either in worse health and or dead and destitute. He was a monster. Again, he was getting very, very rich over the medication, over the airways, over people coming in for his operation or whatever. But he was also incredibly petty. If people did not have the $750, again, equivalent to like $24,000, $25,000 in today's money, they couldn't get the operation. Probably better off not getting it, but they didn't know. They thought of this as life-saving because he presented it as life-saving. And again, it's not like they could just Google that shit. So these stories would reach their way right to the AMA. And the main person who was kind of the figurehead, the adversary really, against Brinkley was a man named Morris Fishbein, who was kind of the face of the investigation into Brinkley's quackery. And Brinkley would use his platform to bash and discredit the AMA for, again, daring to ask that he have some medical credentials to perform surgery or diagnose anybody or prescribe anything. But he still had his radio show and it would go on. It was incredibly popular. Would get to the point that he was making approximately $168,000 a year. In like 1920s, 1930s money, that's like $6.5 million a year. And you gotta say, with all the people being hurt, who's gonna stop the guy? You know, no one's stopping the guy. But eventually his radio license would be revoked, but not for the reasons you would think. Not because, again, he hurt and possibly killed a lot of people because of his misinformation and quackery, but because he said the words erection and climax on the air, particularly in relation to women's orgasms. Okay, feminist icon. He said women deserve to come. Work. A lot of his feminist things were just to make the goat ball procedure more appealing to men. It got at their insecurities, at their egos, saying like, hey, women want a man who is able to and you can't, little bitch, unless you get these goat balls. But the fact that he even said like women have sexual desire was groundbreaking at the time. So I guess, yay, feminist icon. 6 weeks after his radio license would be revoked, the board of medical examiners got together to see once and for all if they should revoke his medical license. That's so funny. I just remembered they know he has a diploma mill, but they haven't taken his license away because they say he spent too much money here, dog. So he still had a license. But they finally was like, hey, maybe it's getting a little crazy. Maybe we should take his license away now. And so he would basically go to a trial of sorts in which he had to defend his medical prowess, at which people who were harmed by his procedures came to testify, particularly about why he should not be allowed to practice medicine ever again. One man claimed that after a prostate operation, Brinkley didn't sew him up and instead filled the gaping wound with a rubber boot heel and sent him on his way. Another man complained that he couldn't move after the procedure, to which Brinkley wrote back basically a review of the vacation he was taking and finished the letter with, "Your condition is your own fault. Merry Christmas." But somehow, Brinkley was able to convince the board to actually come witness him perform surgery, feeling that if they were to see him in his element, to see his prowess, they would know how much skill and dexterity he had in his practice. Surely they would see him as a professional, the professional that he truly was, the icon he was to the masses, that he was deserving of that title. What they saw instead horrified them.
He invited them and they all came and watched him do surgery. He did 2 transplants for them. Yes, they watched the surgery. And they went back to Speaker and revoked his license the next day.
Butcher job he was doing in surgery that they revoked the license immediately. And so after years and years of being able to harm, at this point, about 16,000 people via his operations, not including the people who got hurt and probably died from his medical advice over the airwaves, John Brinkley thought that the only way to regain his license and standing was to begin a career in politics. He would run to become the governor of Kansas. And frighteningly enough, he was actually incredibly successful. Actually, the only way that he lost the race was that the Democrats and Republicans came together to voter suppress him in particular and anyone that voted for him, because they made it that the only votes that counted for Brinkley were ones that were written very specific ways. It couldn't be John Brinkley or J. Brinkley or Dr. Brinkley or anything like that. It had to be J.R. Brinkley. And if it wasn't that, it didn't count. And later it would be found that if they would have counted all the variations of ways that one can vote for Brinkley, he would have easily won. But instead, he got third. The Democrats and Republicans were so fucking terrified that they were like, we gotta do something illegal. Was it illegal at the time? It probably was. He would end up running 3 times in total, the second time also getting closer, but by the third time, they were kind of over him running, so he kind of stopped by there. By the 1930s, he would decide to upgrade his radio transmitter. I don't know how he did this after getting his license revoked. Maybe there was a period in which he had to be off the airways, or he just didn't give a f, which is probably the closer one. He ends up making another radio transmitter that would end up being the most powerful radio transmitter in the fucking world. This is the 1930s. This is post World War I. The had a more powerful radio than the US government. One bought a big ass tower and said, y'all gonna hear me. It was so powerful that it can be heard to Canada and Mexico, where everybody had to hear his fucking goat ball ramblings. He would continue his foray into politics and would vehemently express his negative opinions of FDR, and would also go on about a soft spot that he had for a little angry man with a bad mustache who did a lot of meth at the 36 Olympics. He would actually meet Schreiner at the Olympics, and would also rage on with his own anti-Semitism because his nemesis of sorts at the AMA was a Jewish man, Fishman. He would continue capitalize off of his political cachet, even though he never won anything, into the 1940s. 1941, he would run for Texas Senate, and despite that same year losing a libel case against the AMA, facing investigation from the State Department and IRS, and being charged for mail fraud, he was still not completely taken out of the running of the Senate seat.
He will appeal to the hillbilly mind as it has never been lured before. He is irresistible to the moron mind, and Texas has plenty of such. Perhaps that is unfair. Very likely Texas has no more morons than Kansas. So while pointing with pride to the fact that Kansas escaped the doctor's clutches, we view with alarm for the United States the danger which impends in Texas. If this republic ever totters to its fall, it will be because the moron minority shall sometime, somewhere, somehow gain a party majority by unscrupulous leadership.
Oh, how prophetic. It's almost like we've been here before. Eventually, with the help of the Mexican government, he was actually cut off of the stations right around the time that the US government came knocking at his door. And almost as quickly as he rose, actually quicker, he fell bad. Though he was a multi-millionaire throughout his life, at least equivalent to current money, he would die nearly penniless, dying of blood clots after surviving several heart attacks, and would have his leg amputated. That's some Greek revenge. What the type of Zeus shit? Oddly enough, despite all his own ailments, he never underwent his own goat ball surgery. He had apprentices that would learn the procedure from him. I don't know, that should have been a sign to everyone. Like, do you got goat nuts? You have goat nuts? If you don't have goat nuts, I'm good. But good to know that there was a happy ending somewhere. It's said that his final words were oddly poetic, like a lot of his ramblings on the air were, where essentially he said, if Dr. Fishman goes to heaven, I want to go the other way. That is the story of John R. Brinkley, the demon doctor that you've probably never heard of, who was doing goat ball transplants, hawking pseudoscience over the airways, selling harmful medication, and being the father of country music. I love history, man. I just do. It's a wild thing. Now that I've gotten that off my chest, and now I've ruined your day with all of that information that you didn't need, feel free to like this video and let me know if there's any other rabbit holes that you'd like me to go down, because unfortunately, it's one of my favorite things to do. If you like this video, feel free to like this video. Follow me on my social media, Instagram, Bluesky, both of which are KennieJD. I will see you guys next time.